Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today we're adventuring around the Cape of Good Hope with NatHab Expedition Leader Russell Gerber. Russell, it's great to see you again. I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you, Kendall. Good to have you back, but good to be back again for another edition of the Daily Dose of Nature. And always fun to hang out with you folks for a little while and to give you a taste of Africa from the comfort of your home. So yeah, what are we talking about today? Of course, we'll be diving into the place that is currently my home, and I've been here many years now, and one of my favorite places for sure. On the planet, of course, there's nothing quite like home. So for me, a pleasure to talk about it and to share as much knowledge as I can with you for today. So let's get started. So just a quick picture of myself to let you know a little bit about me and who I am. For those of you who haven't joined us before or watched one of my little webinars in the past, that was a picture of me actually taken from the west coast here in South Africa, not too far from where I'm sitting right now, with, of course, a Cape fur seal, which we'll be talking about a little later on in the show. About me, I've actually studied marine biology. I did an undergraduate degree in zoology, African vertebrate biology, also ichthyology, which is the study of fish, and then I did a postgraduate honors degree in marine biology. I also really liked the bush, though. We spent a lot of time there in the bush on holidays as a family, and as many South Africans, I grew a huge passion for spending time in the wild, and particularly the African wild, of course. I've worked as a safari guide and a marine field guide since I finished my degree. I worked as a scuba instructor, a dolphin trainer for a time, and then, of course, as a safari guide. And I've been working with Natural Habitat since 2018 as an expedition leader. In the last couple of years, while we've all been constrained to our homes, I've been working as a wildlife presenter. We've been doing some live safaris on live cameras around South Africa, which has been a lot of fun. So been able to keep me a little bit immersed in the natural world here in Africa, but that's just a little taste of a background of who I am and a bit of my experience. But today we'll be talking about, of course, the Cape of Good Hope. I'll go into a little bit of an outline for you here. We'll go into first, where is the Cape of Hope, for those of you who are not sure where it is on the planet. We'll go into some of the geographical interests, geographical points, some of the geology of the area. We'll go into some climate, ocean currents, things like that, all the different factors that make it such a unique and special area. Some of the facts and figures for the Cape of Good Hope itself. And then we'll actually do a little bit of fun today, basically a virtual tour of, if you did come down to visit me, what we would do on a typical day out. We're going to squeeze in quite a lot in this particular day, so maybe we wouldn't do all of this in one day if you were here in person, but to give you an idea of the kind of fun things that we could get up to in nature here in the Cape of Good Hope. So that's really the outline for you today. But where are we and what are we talking about here? This is, of course, a map of Africa. Many of you will know exactly what that is. And where we are, of course, South Africa, right down on the bottom of the map in that little red highlighted area over there. And to zoom in a little further, and here, of course, is the map of South Africa. Right in your bottom left-hand corner of your screen, you'll see Cape Town. And that little piece jutting out just below Cape Town is, of course, the Cape Peninsula, which is referred to as the Cape of Good Hope. So that's where we are. You'll see there's our little highlight, and we'll be talking about pretty much the area highlighted by that red circle today. As you can see, a pretty small part of South Africa, but a really, really important part when it comes to the biodiversity of the region, and certainly from a marine biodiversity point of view. This is an older map of, again, an even more focused area. I wanted to show you this to give you an idea of the importance of the Cape of Good Hope as a maritime location. And, in history, it was a really, really important part of navigating Africa from Europe. And of course, the first successful European travelers to do that were, of course, the Portuguese in the 1490s. They were the first to actually round the Cape and make it all the way to India. First done by Bartholomew Diaz and then later by Vasco da Gama. But it wasn't until much later in the 1600s that this area was actually colonized by Europeans. Now, bearing in mind, of course, this area was colonized by, or it was inhabited by indigenous peoples for tens of thousands of years before the arrival of the Portuguese in the region. And those people had a lot of impact on the area itself in terms of historical locations. But as a people themselves, made up of various tribes known as the Khoi and San, they were actually quite nomadic and moved up and down the coastline, not spending too much time in one particular location. So when the first European settlers started to come to the Cape, they didn't actually interact with the local people too much in the beginning. Of course, as those numbers grew, that did, of course, start to become a bit of a bone of contention. But that is not what we'll be focusing on today. I did want to give you a little bit of an idea of the history of the area, but what we will be talking about is this little peninsula that you're looking at. On the right-hand side, you'll see a large area of water known as False Bay, and then we'll be focusing on the Cape of Good Hope and the point itself right at the bottom of your picture, and then going all the way up the west coast. We'll be talking about just heading out of the Cape and the interesting sights and sounds of the western coastline in the region that we'll be touching on today. So just to give you a little bit of a feeling of what we're talking, and as I say, to touch on the historical importance of the Cape when it came to circumnavigating the world and establishing those original trade routes from Europe through to India, essentially. So this is a lovely shot taken by a colleague of mine, actually. We actually studied together at university to become marine biologists, and he took this picture on the perfect day to give you an idea of Cape Point itself. So that little building that you can see towards the bottom of your picture on the left-hand side was actually an old war bunker. It was built there in the 1940s during Second World War and was an actual outpost for some of the naval soldiers and seamen who would actually station there on the lookout for any potential danger or threats that would come through into the bay. But what I really liked about this picture and what I wanted to show you is that it was initially dubbed, in fact, by the first explorers that came through the region, the Cape of Storms. Now, you might have heard that term before in the past as well. And it wasn't until that the sailors actually got back home. It was Da Gama at the time who got back. He actually told the then king of Portugal that they had rounded the Cape and had made it all the way to India. And he decided, the king at the time, that the Cape of Storms was a far too scary name. And he decided to be much more positive and dubbed it the Cape of Good Hope as we know it today, of course. It's situated right on the southwestern tip of Africa, as we looked at in that map. And the Cape of Good Hope itself is slightly to the southwest of this particular point, which is Cape Point. Now, Cape Point is the maritime location that once you've rounded Cape Point, you would have rounded the tip of Africa, whereas it's actually not quite the southernmost tip of Africa at all, which is another location about 150 kilometers to the east of this location, which is known as Cape Gullis. And we'll touch on that a little bit later on as well. So it's not quite the southernmost tip, but it was certainly, in terms of maritime or early maritime navigation, once you'd rounded Cape Point, you had rounded the tip of Africa, and that's often how it was considered. But situated right on the southwestern tip, the whole area is today a World Heritage Site, so therefore of huge importance and in terms of protecting it, both as a natural resource, people that are actually just enjoying the wildlife and area itself, but of course the historical value that it has to the people of South Africa as well, and of course to the world. So we are quite fortunate in the Cape to have 3 World Heritage Sites all in one location. This, of course, being part of it, Table Mountain National Park, which includes Cape Point. We also have Robben Island, which, of course, was made famous by the incarceration of Nelson Mandela. And then lastly, the botanical gardens that we have, which we'll touch on a little later on as well at Kirstenbosch. So a World Heritage Site itself. Um, its location, for those of you who are not aware, is actually around about 34 degrees south, about 34 and a half actually, and 18 and a half degrees east. Some people are quite surprised that it's not further south than that, but we're nowhere near as far south as the tip of South America, which is often what people would compare us to. But it's not quite as far south, and because of that, we get quite a lot more of a subtropical climate down here in the Cape, with a rainfall of about 18 and a half inches every year. So not a particularly wet area when it comes to overall rain. We certainly get much more rain towards the northeastern part of South Africa, up the coast, and that has a lot to do with our weather systems, which we'll talk about a little later on today as well. Um, we tend to get a lot more of our rain in the winter as well. So typically a Mediterranean style climate, where we get these cold, wet winters, but very dry, warm summers. And we're just about heading into summer now, on the edge of spring, basically. The mountain range itself, which is very much what the the peninsula is made up of, is one of the oldest mountain ranges still in existence, in fact, and started forming around 550 or 540 million years ago. But the modern shape that we see of the mountain, Table Mountain itself, and the various jagged cliffs that we see all the way down the peninsula, took its modern shape around 60 million years ago. So it has actually been eroded and was probably quite a lot taller. We just have no real evidence to show that, but it's likely that it was quite a lot taller than it is currently today. So that continuous erosion, which is of course going on as we speak, they say will eventually flatten out the area, but in about 10 million years. So I suspect we have enough time to make it to on a trip before we get to that point. Certainly for me and for you out there. But yeah, interesting that it is actually a shrinking mountain range rather than a growing one, like so many that we know of around the world. What many of you will know as well, and what is often a misconception, is that this is the meeting point of two ocean currents. It's often considered a meeting point of two oceans, and early navigators did actually think that this was the meeting point of the Indian and Atlantic Oceans. But we've discovered, of course, later on that that is not the case, and that the characteristics that you see on each side of the peninsula, on the eastern and western side, are very much driven by the ocean currents that are there, and not so much the ocean. The Cape Point itself is firmly within the Atlantic Ocean. As I said, it's around 150 to 200 kilometers until you get to the southernmost tip of Africa, which is Cape Gullis, which then separates the Indian and Atlantic Oceans. So what does make it interesting is it's that meeting point of two ocean currents, and we'll talk more about those currents a little later. So here we go. Where are those currents running? And this little arrow shows you the first current, and probably the most well-known, which is known as the Gullis Current. That Gullis Current is a warm water current coming down from the equator down the east coast of South Africa, and is actually one of the fastest flowing currents out there in the world, in fact, and in certain locations flowing at around 2.5 meters per second, which is really, really quick for an ocean current system. Now, that warm water drives its way down the east coast towards Cape Town and towards Cape Point. But as you can see, it doesn't go quite straight at Cape Town and Cape Point itself. It actually tends to go past the southern part, quite far south of Cape Town itself. So how do we get warm water from the Gullis Current affecting the ecosystem and climate in the Cape? Well, what happens is we get what's often referred to as a retroflexion, which essentially is a circular movement of that current. So as it goes down, it actually, through Coriolis force, starts to form these huge ocean gyres, and those gyres then form these almost individual circular movements of this now warm water, and those warm water currents then get driven up into False Bay itself. So that's how the warm water is still reaching Cape Point, even though it looks like it should go far south. Eventually, that warm water will start to run into the Southern Ocean and then move naturally with the Gullis Current returning south or returning south and then east towards Australia, eventually moving its way up the west coast of Australia, where it is now a cold water current, and then back up to the equator, circling all the way back towards Africa, where of course it reaches us, and it is a warm water current again, and then on its way south. On the other side of the country, we have the cold water Benguela current, and that current actually moves up the west coast of South Africa. It's a much slower moving current coming up from the Southern Ocean. It's actually quite a lot wider as well, and it slowly meanders its way up the coastline. We also then have a cold water upwelling, which is cold water coming from the depths off the shores of the west coast that slowly, due to the prevailing winds in the region, slowly brings up this cold, highly nutrient-rich water to the surface. Now, that drives a huge fishery economy along the west coast of southern Africa, including Namibia, even up towards Angola. It's nowhere near as diverse as the western side, as the eastern side and the Gullis Current. Of course, that diversity with a lot more tropical and subtropical species, it creates much larger numbers, whereas the west coast is nowhere near as species rich, but there is a far greater number in terms of biomass on the west coast. And it's why that's where our major fisheries for the country actually occur. Now, those two ocean currents not only drive these ecosystems, but also play a huge role in driving the climate of South Africa. That warm water flowing down the east coast of South Africa drives a much more tropical system. And therefore, as you go up the coasts, up the east coast towards the northeastern parts of the country, even up towards Johannesburg, and then onwards to Mozambique, you get a very different type of climate where we have hot, wet, thunderstorm, rainy seasons over December, January, and February, while at the same time down in the Cape, as I mentioned to you, we are actually in the drier time of the year. So it is warm, of course, but it is a much drier period. And we get our rain down here in the Cape typically in the winter months of June, July, and August, whereas June, July, and August up in the northeastern parts of the country, much drier. And that is all driven by this warm current on the east coast and the cold water current on the west coast. So really important in actually driving everything that we're talking about today, from climate to the systems themselves. So this was a shot taken of False Bay. Now, why am I talking about False Bay? And the main reason we have to cover it is it's really one of the most special marine protected areas in Africa, certainly in South Africa. It is a highly endemic region, and it's of huge importance not only to communities living around there who rely on it quite heavily from a fisheries point of view, but also of course for the animal species and the tourism industry that is driven by the incredible diversity of both fauna and flora that you find in the region. And of course, that drives so many things for people to do and to enjoy on a daily basis in False Bay. It's a massive area, around 1,000 square kilometers, and in certain points quite deep at around 40 meters average, which is pretty deep as bays go. But it is quite treacherous too. And a number of spots within the bay, there are shallow rocky reef systems where a number of ships have run aground. And there are also some island systems within the bay, which we'll touch on a little later. The name itself, again, came from that maritime history where False Bay was often mistaken for actually rounding the Cape. So when they were coming back from the east, so down the east coast, they'd be coming down and they would go past a point known as Hangklip, which means hanging stone in Afrikaans. And they would think, because it was often very cloudy, misty, and stormy in the region, those sailors would think that they'd actually rounded the Cape and would sail into the bay by mistake instead of continuing on and going around Cape Point. So when they did so, they found themselves now in the bay where prevailing winds were keeping them in the bay, and that was often a big mistake. And that's how it got its name, False Bay. It was often the false point that they had rounded and then had to make their way back out of the bay to continue sailing north back to Europe. What makes it amazing, even to me still today, is the water in False Bay compared to the other side of the peninsula and the area right in front of Cape Town, which I'll show you in just a moment, known as Table Bay, is almost always 10 degrees or so warmer than Table Bay. So False Bay, always warmer because of those ocean currents and those gyres that we were talking about, sending warm water into the bay, creating an almost subtropical region, in an area which really shouldn't be as such. So it drives the huge level of endemism that we get in False Bay itself. And of course, from a fauna and flora point of view, 10 degrees Fahrenheit is pretty significant. And because of that, we get huge species differences from one side of the peninsula to the other, which is remarkable. This is also the extreme western end of what's known as the Gullis Marine ecoregion, which continues up the east coast of South Africa. And what makes it interesting is this particular region has the highest number of endemic species in South African regions, which is remarkable. Considering if you go further north up towards Durban and even up towards Mozambique, within South Africa, that region has coral reef systems and of course the huge numbers of diversity associated with that, whereas this system is still one of the most diverse, even though it's much cooler. It is the transition period or transition area between the Gullis ecoregion and the cooler Benguela region, which we spoke about. So that Benguela cold water current up the west coast, and then the warm Gullis current coming down the east coast. And these two regions meet at Cape Point. And that means that within that area, we actually have two marine protected areas within the bay itself. So there has been a lot of work done in actually looking after this region. There's a lot of people who have recognized its value, not just from utilization from fisheries point of view, but even just to protect it for its natural value to the people of the Cape itself. So a really special area, and False Bay, absolutely worth talking about. There are a number of highly diverse habitat types across the region. So not only in False Bay, but as we go onto the west coast and up the peninsula towards the western side of South Africa and eventually Namibia, a huge number of different and diverse niche areas that animals and plants have, of course, adapted to living in. And because of that, again, drives this incredible, huge diversity of the region. 60% of marine fauna and flora is endemic to the region, meaning, of course, that it occurs only here. And incredibly, because of those warm water currents flowing down into the bay itself, you get typically Indo-Pacific species on the one side, and then on the other side of the peninsula, on the western side, in the much cooler water, you're often getting species that are much more adapted to cold water environments, even from a polar region at times, at certain times of the year. So really remarkable in terms of what you're likely to see in the region itself. 7 species of whale that we see in the bay, 10 species of dolphin that have been recorded, a huge number of terrestrial species, which we'll touch on a little bit later. That now, sadly, many of them have disappeared, particularly after many of the hunting and safari hunting years in the early colonization of South Africa. But still a number of larger animals that have been reintroduced into the region as well, particularly into the national park. 89 bird species in the region itself, which are near endemic and or endemic themselves, which is often actually more than the entire species list of most countries. But for this area, 89 species just here that occur pretty much nowhere else except for some of our neighbors is remarkable from a diversity point of view. So that's just a little bit of background on the the peninsula itself and the Cape of Good Hope. Now, that term pretty much refers to the whole region, and the more technical term would often be the Cape Peninsula, and a lot of the protected area that still exists here down in the Cape is known or falls under part of what is known as the Table Mountain National Park. Now, this is a pretty iconic picture of Cape Town. And this is, of course, Table Mountain that you're looking at in front of us. And it, of course, forms part of the Table Mountain National Park. It continues all the way down the peninsula to Cape Point. And all the way, you pretty much have towns, suburbs, and the city sprawling all the way around the national park, which means, of course, that it has a lot of people accessing it and using it every year, every day. But it does also make for, of course, one of the most beautiful cities, and the sheer number of animals and opportunity for getting out into the wild in the area is again unbelievable. So the original name for this, the first recorded written name for the mountain that people have discovered, was actually known as Horekwaho, which is a Khoisan derived name. Again, the original indigenous people who lived in the area, and it meant basically the mountain in the sea, which is a beautiful name. As even from the beginning. It was later dubbed Table Mountain by early explorers that came through, and it was in fact the Portuguese who we spoke about who first called it Table Mountain. It's made up of a number of major features, which I'll show you in the next slide. But basically, Devil's Peak, Table Mountain, Lion's Head, and the 12 Apostles make up the main features, and then also Signal Hill, which again I'll show you in just a few moments. And those are the main features that if you did come to visit, those were the areas we'd be looking at. Again, I'll show you exactly where all those are in just a moment. Sitting right beneath, of course, Table Mountain is what is known as the City Bowl, and that's the oldest part of Cape Town, the oldest part of the colonization of South Africa. So this was really where the first settlers in the Cape started to make their home, which of course was the Dutch in the 1650s. The Portuguese before that actually didn't set up much in terms of actual colonies here in the Cape. It wasn't until the Dutch East India Company decided to settle in the region that the initial colonization of the area started to occur. So this is where we would kick off our tour. If we were heading out on a day, essentially we would be starting in this region, heading up to one of these beautiful viewpoints and checking out some of these incredible views. After that, heading down into the city itself, enjoying some of the historical sites, one of them the company's garden, which is actually the location for the original little vegetable garden for the Dutch East India Company and their first settlement of the area. We'd have a look at the Castle of Good Hope, the first building here in the Cape, and of course the restaurants and all the other magical things that Cape Town has to offer on city tours in the Cape. And generally, if we were kicking off our tour, this is where we would start. Another thing, of course, that is magical about the area and something that you could do, for a whole day in the Cape, in fact, you could do it for weeks, is hiking. There are a huge number of trails that go up the mountain, the most popular of which is known as Platte Klip Gorge, which is in the front of Table Mountain. It actually takes you up a small little gorge all the way to the tabletop itself. And that hike would take you about 2 hours at a leisurely pace. So it does have a pretty steep elevation, but is actually a really, really fun and easy hike to do. There's abseiling as well, if you have the guts for it, basically rappelling down the side of the mountain. It's not really my thing, but it is something that they do offer on the mountain. And of course, mountain climbing, hugely popular with a number of local residents and visitors from around the world. But here is just a more aerial view of the whole of Cape Town itself. So this is the city bowl, as we spoke about. The city actually continues on the southern side of the mountain and to the north, which would be on the left-hand side of this picture. But just to clarify for you what we were looking at, these are the major features. So that red arrow is pointing to what is known as Devil's Peak. And then we've got the green arrow, which is pretty much the highest point of Table Mountain, and that is known as Maclear's Beacon. That second green arrow is still Table Mountain and actually pointing to the location of the cable car the top of the cable car station. So when you take the cable car, that's where you would end up. And then we've got Lion's Head. It's the blue arrow over there. And then Signal Hill, which is the front part of the lion itself. Now, these are the terms that they were, what names that they were originally given. I still don't really see a lion in that, but that's what they say it's called. And then off in the distance, heading down the peninsula, is the 12 Apostles. So you might have heard of those terms before, but that is just to give you a quick idea of exactly where they are. So this is the cable car that we would take to get up to the top of the mountain. You can, as I say, hike if you want to, and it goes straight up to that station at the top left-hand side of your picture now, and is one of the most popular ways to get up to the top, and also one of the most popular tours in the Cape. The top of the mountain is absolutely beautiful, wide open spaces, lots of trails on the top, where you can spend easily a couple of hours on there simply enjoying the views and a walk along the pathways and hiking trails themselves. Not only is it, of course, beautiful views, but there are incredible flowers and plants to see, occasionally animals, and the most commonly seen little rock hyrax, which is easily the favorite for many of the kids who visit the area. All part of Table Mountain National Park, as I said. And once you get to the top at the cableway, you're at about 3,300 feet. The highest point is 3,554 feet, which is at McClear's Beacon, which I showed you in the last diagram. Very steep in terms of its elevation. You're pretty much going up about 700 meters in height in a very, very short distance. So very, very steep cliffs that you find all along the mountain range down towards Cape Point. It's made up of three major rock types. Sandstone at the top is slowly eroding away. Then we've got shale below that, and then some granite that actually squeezes its way through the base of this whole system. And you'll see more of that as we get down towards Simonstown, where those big granite boulders are actually named for Boulders Beach, which is where we find our penguins, which I'll get to a little later. As I mentioned, it is right in the middle of the city, so you get a huge number of people going through here, around 4.2 million visitors to the park every year. And that, of course, includes local people simply going on a hike into the park. So very, very popular place to go. But what I can tell you from a personal point of view is you would be amazed at how quickly you go into one of these tracks or one of these areas and you feel alone. It's very quiet. You don't actually see a lot of people, even though it feels like there should be. And it does offer this incredible wildlife sanctuary in the middle of the city, right on your doorstep for the residents of the Cape. Huge number or amount of cycling tracks as well. Mountain biking is a massively popular pastime here in the Cape, and is also now one of the 7 new wonders of the world. I will admit that that was a voted for accolade. So I'm not sure, I don't think I actually even voted, but it is a voted for accolade. It is not one of the ancient wonders or natural wonders of the world traditionally, but it is a new wonder of the world, which is quite cool. It is also a World Heritage Site, which I mentioned, and home to over 8,200 plant species, which brings us to one of the most important things about the Cape of Good Hope, and that is the Cape Floral Kingdom. Now, it is a remarkable floral kingdom all on its own. And for many people around the world, it can be often the only reason they come to the Cape. It's one of 6 floral kingdoms, and it's the smallest of all those kingdoms, but proportionally actually the richest in terms of diversity. It's referred to locally as fynbos, which is an Afrikaans term. Afrikaans is one of our local languages, which is derived very much from Dutch. And fynbos actually means essentially small leaves. And in many cases, most of the species do have quite small leaves. So it was considered to have come from how the plants actually looked. And as I said, is very much how we refer to these particular plants today. There's 3 major groups. There's the proteas, which is probably the most famous, which most people have seen before, and this is a protea you're looking at now. There is, of course, the ericas, and then lastly the restios, which are mainly grass species. The whole area itself for this whole floral kingdom is only around 90,000 square kilometers. and never more than 200 kilometers from the sea. So they very much rely on ocean breezes and some, at least, moisture and humidity from the coastlines where you find them. But there is over 8,500 species in the region itself, in the Cape Floral Kingdom, and 70% of them are endemic. 20% of the genera are endemic, as well as 6 whole plant families. So again, if you're a botanist, it's easily one of the most special places to come on a trip. And to put that in perspective for many of us who aren't botanists, it has 3 times the plant diversity per square kilometer more than the Brazilian rainforest. So an amazing, amazing place to come and see these particular flowers. And they're still finding new species just about every year. So really, really interesting. What is important for them, like so many of our plant systems around the world, particularly areas where it's a little bit drier, is that they do actually require burning to survive. Otherwise, they do become moribund, which essentially means that they start to die. Um, and those fires are pretty natural in the area. We do get them pretty consistently every few years. And of course, in more recent times, things have been a little bit more serious. But we've managed to avoid those fires for a while. We're coming into the warm season now, and hopefully we can do so again. But even though the plants do require it, of course, they don't require it too often, and certainly not as often as we have had in recent times. But as we continue on our tour down the Cape, we would head from the city, heading down the the eastern side of the peninsula. And one of our first stops would be wine country as well. We've got to kick off the day with a glass of wine, as any good tourists would do. And this, of course, is the area known as Constantia, which is one of the oldest and most renowned wine regions in the world. South African wine was very much put on the map by this particular vineyard, known as Groot Constantia, founded in 1685. And these grapevines were first planted by the Dutch and brought in by the French Huguenots. And has become a huge, huge industry and a big part of the culture here in the Cape itself. One thing we have to mention is a particular type of wine that was first actually created here in South Africa, known as Pinotage, which was actually a melding of 2 varietals together, known as Hermitage and Pinot Noir, which of course many of you would know. It was simply to create a red wine species or vintage that would, not vintage, sorry, a particular type of wine that would actually survive in the climate and warm climates of Africa. And they created Pinotage, which is pretty much a mix, I would say, in flavor between a Merlot and a Shiraz kind of flavor. So really interesting, and it was actually created here in South Africa. And if you ever come visit, you got to give it a try. Many people, of course, do enjoy more time and more healthy things in the vineyards rather than just eating and drinking, like doing hiking trails and, of course, cycling, which is quite a popular pastime. You can even do a cycling wine tasting tour, which, if you don't drink too much wine, is pretty great. If you drink too much, it's not the best idea in the world. But after the wine region, we would then carry on down south, down the peninsula, heading into what is known as Simonstown. And Simonstown is home to Boulders Beach, which is, of course, home to these lovely little characters, the African penguins. And the African penguin colony at Simonstown, home to over 2,000 birds, which started coming around 1982. They first started coming in small little groups of basically male and female pairs, and started breeding in people's gardens. And that became a problem pretty quickly, of course. They were crossing the roads, getting hit by cars. There were dogs and cats that were taking them out. And eventually the community created this little colony, which essentially has fenced people off from the penguins. So they can move freely into False Bay and go to their fishing grounds. And then they live along the coastline without being disturbed by the people who either live in the area or, of course, come to visit the penguins themselves. They used to be called jackass penguins. That's not a joke. They were called that because of their call, which sounds very much like a donkey call. And if you ever come down and see them, you'll hear very quickly what they were talking about. This is just another little picture that you can see of the penguins themselves and how you would view them at Boulders Beach itself. And as you can see, you get really close to them and can get some really, really awesome pictures. There's also a beach where you can go and lay out just a little ways up from here. And often the penguins come and hang out next to you while you're laying on your towel as well. So a really, really special area. And as I said, the thing about the Cape is how immersed in wildlife you can be just a couple of minutes outside of town. Another great part of it, of course, is this particular region of False Bay is renowned for its diving and snorkeling. Um, it is also well known for shark cage diving, for, of course, the great white sharks, which are prevalent in the area. They used to be. They've actually moved off a lot from the False Bay for the time being. The reason being suggested that a couple of orca have driven them away from the area, and those orca were actually feeding on the great whites. There was some evidence for that. There's also evidence to show that simply overfishing of False Bay has forced them into other regions. Even though the sharks are known for eating seals, they do actually eat a lot of fish species, especially when they are not quite fully grown. And so it seems they've moved up the coast a little towards Plettenberg Bay, up the east coast of South Africa. But nonetheless, there's still great shark cage diving for other shark species in the region, scuba diving as well, a massively popular pastime, even though it's pretty cold in the bay. But the kelp forest, swimming through the kelp forest is just quite magical. And of course, you can see the colors of soft corals that you see all around the region, various anemone species, starfish species, all kinds of mollusks, as I mentioned, sharks. We get six-gill sharks as well, all kinds of pelagic fish species from mackerel to tuna, and even the occasional sailfish. We get Cape clawless otter in the region too, who spend most of their time on the shoreline and not too much in the water, but they're also there. West Coast rock lobster, and many, many other species that you get. And as you can see, just beautiful, beautiful colors under the water, and it emphasizes the amazing diversity in False Bay and the region itself. Snorkeling, as I mentioned, a massively popular pastime for kids, families, and all those visiting Cape Point. And as you're on this little tour with me, after we heading down False Bay now, past Simonstown, we're going now down towards Cape Point, and these snorkeling sites there are loads of them around the Cape Point region in these shallow rocky pools, which is hugely fun for anyone coming into the area. Kayaking in the bay, also massively popular, and another way you can see the penguins, and a lot of people like to do that. Sailing in the bay is growing in popularity, and of course, fishing, surfing, all other kinds of marine activities that you can think of in the bay. So this is now a view down towards Cape Point. We're looking at Cape Point off in the distance there. You can see a fisherman in the foreground, and the grasses that you see are the restio species, which of course are part of the Cape Floral Kingdom. And we're looking now down south towards the meeting point of those two ocean currents. But within the national park, particularly here around Cape Point, there is another little park known as the Cape of Good Hope Nature Reserve. And in that reserve, we have reintroduced eland, Cape Mountain zebra, baboon, caracal, even the occasional leopard is seen, and also bontebok, another species of antelope that we get in the region. So really lots to see, a lot of those things you don't see too often, but they are there in the reserve. So you do have the opportunity of seeing some game in the Cape if you're lucky. Hiking, as we spoke about, also not just Table Mountain, but actually in the peninsula and down at Cape Point Nature Reserve as well. Massively popular pastime. There's even places you can stay overnight. Bird species in the region, again, really, really special. We touched on the amount of endemics that you get, but the massive numbers of cormorant that you get in the area, from Cape cormorant to bank cormorant as well. We have white-chested cormorants, massive, massive numbers, and again, quite a spectacle to see altogether. Now, as we head up the coast, we're now heading back up towards Cape Town, coming back from Cape Point. We go into the colder water. Now, often that water is beautiful blue in color, This was actually me with my little doggy on the beach, and this is an area known as Long Beach. And now we're coming into that region that is much more productive in terms of biomass in our major fishery systems, but much, much colder water, at least 10 degrees Fahrenheit colder throughout the year than the False Bay side. So beautiful beaches, and of course, walking on the beach is a massively popular pastime as well. We're now looking up from False Bay towards Namibia, essentially, and you can see also here huge amount of mussels. This is one of the west coast mussel species that we get, and of course the seafood available all along the coastline is really, really incredible. Again, because of the upwelling of that cold water and all those systems along this coastline that drives the massive amount of nutrients required to keep all those species alive and ticking. As we go a little further north, we come into the beautiful Hout Bay. And Hout Bay, named after the area, it used to have a lot of natural forests in the area where they would get timber. And this is the bay itself. That rocky outcrop you can see on the other side is actually the Sentinel overlooking the bay. And just down to the left of it is the seal colony in the area. And one of the other hugely popular pastimes is snorkeling with seals in the Cape. And this is, of course, the Cape fur seal. This little colony itself is actually where a lot of the young pups spend a lot of their time and growing up. And it's an area known as Deca Island. About 8,000 seals in the colony, protected by a surrounding thick kelp forest. And as I said, they offer incredible snorkeling trips in the area too that you can do with the family. It's a little cold. You get a wetsuit, but it's an amazing experience as well. And then as you head north out of Cape Town, I just wanted to put this in as well. There is the beautiful West Coast National Park area. And this is actually a town just north of that known as Paternoster. All along this coastline is all about fisheries and the big fishing villages or the small fishing villages that are in the areas. The major fish species they go for would be hake. You also get pilchards and anchovy, and that is caught in vast, vast numbers along the coastline, all driven by this nutrient-rich system. But as you can see, completely different from one side of the coastline to the other, all to do with those two ocean currents, which basically drives everything. So just a little taste of what the whole tour of the peninsula would look like in one day. As I said, it would probably take a bit more time than one day to get through all of that, but just a quick taste of a day adventuring around the Cape of Good Hope. So that's it. Thank you, everybody.
All
And I'd love
right.
to have some questions if you've got.
Yeah, thank you so much, Russell. This is an area and a country I've always wanted to go to. It's on my bucket list, and it's just so beautiful, and the sheer variety of flora and fauna in the area specifically is outstanding. So thank you
Yeah.
so much for that. It's a big topic. We're going to get to questions in just a second, but I just want to remind everyone, if you're interested in traveling to this area, definitely visit our website, nathab.com/Africa. To view all of our Africa trips and specifically our South Africa adventures. And we can travel to the Cape of Good Hope if you're interested. All right, so let's get to questions. A reminder, if you want to submit a question, you can do that in your control panel under the questions field. Okay, first question. Towards the beginning, you had an image of the Cape of Good Hope, and someone was just wondering if you're able to go right to the edge. They saw a little road or a pathway to that building, but they were just wondering if we could go all the way to the edge.
You can actually. You could get pretty much right down to there is a pathway that takes you to the lower lighthouse. And once you're there, you can actually then there's a little way to get down right down onto the edge. But it gets very windy down there at certain times of year. So you have to be there on a good weather day to be able to walk right down to the edge. When it is windy and if you're not right down there, there are still little protected areas where you can get great views without being battered by the wind. But yes, there are a huge number of trails just from the lighthouse. There's one going all the way down to the bottom lighthouse. There's another one going down to a different beach. There's one down to a little private beach, basically a little cove known as Diaz Beach, which is massively popular as a hike. So yeah, the amount of trails within the Table Mountain National Park is frightening. And as I say, just a couple of minutes outside of your neighborhood, and you can be on a trail without, you don't even hear a sound besides the birds and the wild. So pretty special.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So there is someone watching who you mentioned orca earlier. They're just wondering what kind of what whale species are found in that area.
So the most common species we get are the southern right whale, and then humpback whales. Those would be the most common. We also get Bryde's whale, orca that I mentioned as well. We get minke whale, and then a number of dolphin species too, which would be mainly bottlenose dolphin, common dolphins. We get heavy-sides dolphin as well, and then also there's another one too, which will come to me in a minute. But those are the most commonly seen, marine mammal species we get, other than the seals. Cape fur seals is by far the most abundant seal. Every now and again, we'll get subantarctic fur seal coming through, elephant seal every now and again, but they're normally a little lost when they are here, but they do show up from time to time, the Antarctic species.
And if someone is diving or snorkeling, what type of sharks could they see?
So look, the most common ones you'll see are little ones, little pajama sharks, which are beautiful. They've got this wonderful sort of stripy coloration on them, or blotchy coloration on them. And then the bigger shark species that you'd see would be bronze whaler, which is looks similar to a sort of gray reef shark in the Caribbean. Looks similar to that. Ragged tooth sharks as well. Mako sharks. We get seven gill sharks as well. And then of course, the most famous, the great white. So, they occurred in the bay in pretty high numbers for many years, and it's just been pretty recently that we've seen a big drop off in numbers. Some of the most world renowned and well known photographs of white sharks were taken in this area. That I think there was a whole documentary called Air Jaws, if you remember that, which was about the
Mm.
breaching white sharks. That was mostly shot down here in False Bay itself, but it seems that those sharks have moved on up the coast for the time being. And as I said, we're not sure if it's because of the orcas or because of overfishing, but for now, they've been recorded occurring much more up the east coast.
Mm. So there's some interest in the flowers of the area, and
Mm.
someone here is wondering specifically when the proteas bloom, and just in general, when is the best time of year to view the flowers?
So yeah, look, unsurprisingly, spring is pretty much the best time to go. The thing about the proteas is that they tend to bloom actually in winter, which is quite interesting. So we get most of our rain in the winter, as I mentioned. So you'll see a lot of them actually starting to bloom in late winter and early spring. So anywhere around August and September, coming to see the flowers is really quite special. And then as you go further up the west coast, which was the last little spot that we spoke about, up towards Paternoster, and then a little further north in the Cape area, is an incredible wildflower region known as the Makwa land, and that also is around about spring. That would be the best time to come. So for sure, if you're keen on the flowers, particularly the proteas and the wildflowers, I would say August or September would be the best time.
Okay, great. Some curiosity about Table Mountain. Someone wants you to say again, how high is it? And someone's wondering how much time it takes to hike to the top.
Yeah, I mean, look, depends on how fit you are. I've done a number of 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 trips up that mountain, and I've felt absolutely ashamed that as I walk up, there's somebody running past me. you know, up to the top, and I'm about halfway up, and they're running back down again. So it depends on how quick you are. But look, it's 3,500 feet at the top. So you know, it's not one of the highest mountains in the world, but if you consider it's going from about 1,000 feet, you know, to 3,500, and it's pretty much straight up from that point. So
Mm.
you know, the quickest trail up is Platte Klip Gorge, which is in the front. And as I said, at a leisurely walk, you do it in about 2 hours, I would say. But most people would do it in about an hour,
Okay,
up
great.
to the top, as again, depending how fit you are.
And I get that a lot in Colorado. Don't worry, you're not alone. Uh, we've got a question here about the coral reefs and their health. You know, we see a lot in the news about, you know, climate change and other human impacts on the coral reefs. How are they doing in that area?
Yeah, look, because they're not hard corals, these are mostly soft coral systems that you see here. They don't get hit quite as hard. They're much more tolerant to cold water and also to temperature changes than the hard corals, which is mainly, you know, that destruction of the corals is mainly due to coral bleaching, which is essentially the ejection of of a of algae by the actual by the coral polyps themselves. And when they do that, it goes white, and eventually those systems basically become skeletons and break. The soft corals are not like that. They actually you know, get their nutrients from from the surrounding water, and also from the sun to a degree, but again, not as much as you get in the hard corals themselves. So we haven't seen bleaching, as it were, in the bay, but of course damage from you know, from overuse, from human interaction, things like that, is of course a major issue. And in certain areas that are easily accessible, you can certainly notice that damage, as you would in many places that are popular, especially dive locations. So we do see that, but again, there's some really awesome work and conservationists working hard at looking after these marine protected areas where they're not allowing people in. You actually can't even dive there in some instances, and certainly no fishing or spearfishing, as in this photograph here. But yeah, they're doing an awesome job in certain locations to make sure that those areas are protected. But I have no doubt that there are, you know, large areas affected by climate change. Coral reef systems are renowned for that, but as I said, soft corals in this colder water are not quite as immediately impacted as the hard coral cousins.
Okay, well, that's some good news. All right, well, it is past the top of the hour, so I'm going to call it there with questions. Russell, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to hear from you again. And before I hand it back to you for closing comments, I just want to remind everyone who's watching, if you're interested in learning more about how you can travel to South Africa, definitely give us a call at the number you see on the screen. You can visit our website or send us an email at that contact information as well. All right, Russ, over to you for closing comments.
Thanks, Kendall. Yeah, same as always, folks. What a pleasure hanging out with you for our daily dose of nature. I hope you enjoyed our touch on the Cape of Good Hope. As you can see, it's a huge topic. There's so many things to do. There's so much time that you could spend chatting about all the various aspects that make it so special. But yeah, I have to say, a wonderful place to live, and an even more wonderful place to show, you know, visitors from around the world when they come. Because yeah, you can never do it justice on a screen. So hopefully some of you out there will come and join us for a trip around this incredible you know, wildlife and biodiversity hotspot, and I hope to see you soon. So for now, it's cheers from me. Thanks, Kendall.
All right, thanks again, Russell. I can't wait to get out there and see you. And my thanks as well to everyone who tuned in today. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we'll have the replay available on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody. Good night, Russell.